Good morning. My name is George Mayer, and I'm going to put on a slideshow of 80 slides for my tours in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, and Yemen. And I have some local Yemeni stuff there. If you get lost in what I'm talking about, there's a big map and a little map there. And I'm a retired RCAF pilot. I've flown for 38 years. I have 10,860 hours, and I survived my 1 year in the Middle East, but barely. I'm very pleased and very welcome to you ladies, gentlemen, veterans, and they would like to keep me, they'd like me to keep it short, and I will answer questions later. If you have a burning question, I'll answer it right on the spot. Any questions right now? No? Okay. We have on the screen here, a little on the dull side, as Sinai, Yemen is the capital. The outposts I'm going to talk about in Yemen are one on the Red Sea, one on the border of the Regal-Kali Desert, and one on the inside. I was in Winnipeg flying navigators around, getting lost, and after 3 years, I decided that if I wanted some excitement, I had better look at the next job. And I ran into a fellow pilot in the mess in Winnipeg, and he was wearing a yellow sand-colored ribbon that I'd never seen before, and we had a little chat. He said, all you have to do is volunteer, and they only took volunteers to go over the Mediterranean or to Egypt or UN. And lo and behold, after applying, I got a posting to El Arish, Egypt. Now there's another mission called the Yemen Observer Mission, but nobody knew anything about it. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it later. And so my first action was to go down to Trenton, Ontario, and get checked out as a pilot on the de Havilland Otter, which is a single-engine airplane that will, we didn't use it on it floats in the desert, but just the wheels. And the twin-engine Caribou engine, which is much larger. It's 30,000 pounds. It had 1,450 horsepower, 2 engines, and those 2 airplanes were doing the whole mission over there. So this is a map in case you want to see it later, but it's also there in paper, and there's some artifacts there from Yemen. Here's your guide for this trip to the Sinai, and I borrowed the commanding officer's Jeep because it was the only one that would start, and I was also the mechanic. Particular time I was 23 years old. El Arish was in Egypt. This is the main entrance to the camp. There were approximately 135 people in this camp. They count RCAF, count Army, count Yugoslavs, whatever. We were living in this camp surrounded by a fence and guarded by the Yugoslavians. This is the non-commissioned officers building, and it's right on the side of an oasis. This is an oasis of similar design. However, it looks very nice, and you had to go through here and make a right turn to get onto the base. It looked like a really nice place to go through, but the human waste used to be dumped in there to fertilize the palm trees. This is the airport at El Arish, which we shared with the Egyptians, and that was a hair-raising situation. You will notice a fighter jet that's a Mystère 15 that the Israelis only flew on certain times. And when the UN aircraft came in from Europe with our supplies, and they would fire up a couple of these 15s and meet it on the way in, just to show that they're active. Yeah, that's your tour guide for this trip. That is the single-engine Otter. It's an absolutely marvelous machine. It's classified as an STOL, short takeoff and landing, and I had a lot of fun flying the engine. You will notice the 9mm Mauser. We had to go with the warrant officer on the base to the shooting range. He wanted to make sure that we could all use the 9mm Browning if we had to. And so we each fired, I don't know, about 9 shots. And after I finished, he came up to me and he said, George, he said, if you ever run into trouble and you think you need to use the 9mm Browning, he said, I suggest you take it out of the cover and you throw it at whatever's threatening you, and you run like hell the other way. Yeah. We only used one pilot to fly these. This is the desert that surrounds El Arish and borders on Israel. You notice the rainbow there, which happens only once every 100 years or so. And that's what the Sinai Desert looks like. Just a little bit towards the north to Beirut is the normal beach. The beach is along here. These are the civilian sort of country cottages. So they were just outside the base. There are a number of local kids found out that if they hung around the front gate to the base, they got the occasional a few pennies, they got some candy, and they also got some cigarettes. I don't know how old this fellow is, and he was in charge of the unit mascot, which is a goat, and the fellows got together and got the material together and made him a coat. It was quite cold at night. His name was Twilight, and I needn't tell you what most of the badges are. The only grass in Sinai was on our base, and that was thanks to the commanding officer who bought the seed, and we won't mention what they used for fertilizer, thank you. And we had one hand manual lawnmower, and if you heard an uprising outside the barracks, it was the locals in charge of keeping the place looking good. They were fighting as to who was going to use the lawnmower. It's another chap that used to hang around the gate that went right into the main street of Sinai, and somebody gave him a ride once, and so he thought that this was really great. He had a Jeep to his disposal. The kids were all right. They were very honest. This was the radio shack on the base. They were in communication with the world, so HF radios, and The one fellow that I became very friends with was a Norwegian, but he doesn't have to, isn't in that picture right now. This was the officers' barracks here. This was our restaurant. So here we have, I think that's me, and we had locals as guards at the main gate. And it was not a very good security thing because you see some green stuff in his, what do you call it? Yeah, that's a local drug. It's called CAT, Q-U-A-T. And you had to chew it, understand, for 24 hours before you actually got something out of it. But I gave up after about 15 minutes. It was terrible. So we made kind of friends with the locals, and we also learned to speak a little bit of Arabic. This was the tailor's shop where we all got fitted out with the oversized shirts and pants and stuff that we got in Trenton before we left for here. This is the back entrance to the gate. It's not in the picture, but over here there was a mosque, and they used that for their praying 5 times in 24 hours, continuous. I didn't think it was funny at the time or even later, but the one that came on at, let's say, 2 or 3 in the morning, one of the Yugoslav guards couldn't stand it anymore and picked up his machine gun and went out and started firing at the base. And it went right up to where the chap was saying his high volume prayers. And we didn't hear much after that. This is the hospital, which is empty, but it was only used for 1 week after you got there because, as was explained to me, the water and the germs and all that kind of stuff in the water will make you very sick for about a week. And so when I arrived there and they took me on a tour and we ended up there, and he had a schedule for the pilots, the first week of flying for me was there, then there was a blank week, and then there was the normal whatever the hell you call it, the program. So I said, what's the 1 week in there that's blank? He said, well, guaranteed you're going to get sick in the 5th or 6th day, and you're going to be really sorry for 3 or 4 days. Don't worry, we have the medicine, and you'll be right as red for 3 days after you take the visit, and then you'll be cleared to go flying again. But it was really miserable. This is the post office. It was the most valued building in there, where all the letters came from home. And we get to read what's going on at home. This is the officers' barracks. This was my room here. This walkway went over to another building, and the door led into the bar. And one of the water tanks is up on the ceiling or the roof, and that's where we got our hot water. Because in the summer, the temperatures would be anywhere between 105 to 120, and so we all sort of jumped into the showers after supper. This was the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Theater, if you'll pardon the pun. And what happened there was somebody had a little bit too much to drink, and I'm standing on the roof of the mess, and he took the fire extinguisher that was full of water and started squirting the people down here, and this led into a water fight. You do all kinds of things on these funny deployments out in the middle of nowhere. This was the main water supply, but it was just as bad as everywhere else. But it did put out fires, okay, if we had one. And you'll notice we were there over Xmas. Now this is outside the back gate to the, there's the Mediterranean, and there's the local store, and it was just full of junk. But it was okay. Souvenirs. This is Mr. Nick. Mr. Nick is a Greek, and he was in Athens when the big trouble started out between the Greeks and somebody else, kind of a little war going on. And our United Nations chaps were friendly with him in Athens, and they took him, disguised him, made some paperwork that was not real, and they got him out of there, and they brought him up to Elarish. He was the bartender. He was 95% blind, and he knew after about the third time, if you were brand new, going into the bar and you ordered a drink, the next time, after about 3 times, you went up there, you opened the door, you got to the bar, and you got what you normally drink, and he had it ready. And he was blind. You didn't dare ask Mr. Nick what was for lunch or supper, because it was the same answer every time. And eggs and chips, that's all, it's the only food he ever knew. You get a little tired of getting that menu. That's Mr. Nick. When Yemen was closed down, when the Egyptians decided to come down and wreck the place, again, UN folks rescued him and took him to the island.
Cyprus.
Where?
Cyprus?
Cyprus, yeah, they took him to Cyprus because there were groups and
The Turks and Cyprus.
yeah, Turks, yeah, thanks a lot. This was my room in Elarish. And a bunch of junk, but some important things. The wood carving I bought there, a little whatever cloth. You'll see these 2 jambias, knives. You'll see 2 of them there, and I'll explain later. We each had a type recorder that we bought for next to nothing. We had a little store on the base, and things were really cheap. The 2 most important things here in this picture, you see a cross with some ribbon on it. I was awarded this, and I'll tell you about it later. And this is not a stick, it's the 6 feet of antenna off the lead army jeep of a patrol along the Egyptian Arab border. Don't forget to remind me. We have UN flags on every corner of every building just to make sure they know who's there in the buildings. Mr. Harper, Wing Commander Harper, he was over there as a base commander, and one of the airmen was a bit of an artist, and he built this for a presentation. Irish lunch hour bar thrasher. He used to lead the Friday afternoon 40-kilometer trips up to the army in Rafah to their, thank God it's Friday. He was quite the fellow. Call for Mr. Harper. He was, unfortunately, a month later, killed on the lousy road between us and the army base at Rafah. What the Egyptians did there was, just before it was really dark, what they had manufactured was about 7-foot-long pieces of railroad track, and 3 pieces welded together in a most ugly thing, and they would drag them out and put them on the highway. There are no lights, basic pavement, sand on either side. Mr. Harper and the supply NCO were going up to Rafah for business, and he didn't see that thing on the road, blocking the road, and ran into it, and he was killed. And the supply officer was hurt badly. So sometimes it's just not funny. This is the Sinai, the desert. You can see it's not flat. And yes, it's not flat. There's some more of it. And there's the border of Israel, Egypt, and then the border goes down here. And we used to do patrols at low level along the border until we got right over to the Red Sea. And I will admit it now, but started to feel my oats, and we would patrol the border. And when I got to a position somewhere over here, I noticed the 6 or 7 vehicle white UN traveling one behind each other along the border, which was a standard patrol to see that everything was okay. And so I said, well, I'm going to do a little pass over top of them and make sure that everything is okay, and if it's not, I can report it when I get back. And so I got, the sand was like huge waves in the ocean, and I judged where they were coming up on another dip like that, and then the top, and where I was in the airplane flying at 20 or 30 feet, and I judged my position so that I went right over top of the convoy when they were on the top of one of those sand dunes. And as I went by, I heard clack, and I said, oh, what's that? I checked all my instruments, everything's fine, nothing's unusual. So I stayed at 20 feet, and I roared back to El Arish, and I said, there we go, I don't know what that was. Then the warrant officer came out and said, sir, I want you to see this. I said, I didn't do it. He said, well, I want you to see this. And he brought that piece of antenna that I showed you. He brought that out, and he said, look at what you got. I said, no, that wasn't me. I didn't do it. He knew darn well what it was, so he gave it to me as a souvenir. And the following week, the army in Rafah invited all of the folks in El Arish, well, the air crew and some NCOs and so on, out to a Friday thrash. And so I sort of wondered why the army chaps kept buying me beer, but after about 3 beers, the lights went dim. The commanding officer up there said, is Flying Officer Mayer here? And I looked around, and said, here I am. I said, please come up here, we have a present for you. And somehow they had gotten the piece of antenna from El Arish, brought it up to Rafah, and they presented me with this 6-foot piece of antenna, and had good luck and whatever. The other thing that happened with that was that as I went over top with my airplane with a high power setting and lots of noise and very low, and I went over the convoy and down into the, and came back, and the folks in the white Jeeps suddenly all stopped together, but I was gone. I couldn't see what else happened. And it came up in that presentation that they thought they were being attacked. Well, it was a white otter. They should have known better. But they thought we were being attacked. And so they got out of the Jeeps and crawled underneath it. But they had an Israeli general along just for a little tour. And what they also gave me in Rafah, along with the piece of antenna, was the commanding officer got a very officious looking bill for dry cleaning for all the uniforms they got grease on from hiding underneath the Japs, underneath the Jeeps. Yeah. This is a monument to victory for the Egyptians. And that was the war, the previous one to when I got there at 63. And I think that was about early 50s or something around there. It's hard to get accurate information. And this victory one was put up by the Egyptians in Egypt. And what it was the Israelis gave the Egyptians back their 2 prisoners of war. The Egyptians, I always get it mixed up. The Israelis gave the Arabs, the Egyptians, 2,200 prisoners, and the Egyptians gave the Israelis back 2 prisoners of war. That's in print somewhere. No, I'm not faking it, but this was the Egyptian monument to victory over the Israelis. This is the kind of country that we're flying over in the Sinai. It's not all flat sand, and if you're flying a single-engine airplane, you always have a little thing picked out somewhere within your range if the engine quits that you can land safely somewhere. And I can tell you, it is awful hot flying over there with a 450 horsepower engine right in your funnel, and the outside temperature is 110. Now, if you can read that sign, mines, M-I-N-D-S, mines. This is now going south down to the Sharm el-Sheikh, which is the southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula. But they're whining you about mines. And even on the airport with airplanes, we had to make sure that new folks always knew where to stop and check their engine and all the checks you got to do. Because if you went off the tarmac, you could easily set off a mine and blow yourself up. So some serious stuff there. There's the sign on the way down, welcome to Sharm el-Sheikh, and there are the mountains in the southern part of the Sinai. This, of course, is a caribou sitting there. Now we're looking due south. This is a wadi, or a dry creek, dry riverbed, going down to the southern tip of Sharm el-Sheikh. This is what happens when you hit one of their landmines. I'm sure a couple of you are familiar. This was an anti-personnel bomb when the Israelis came down and took over the southern part of the Sinai. This was at one of the outposts we had, which was close to Sharm el-Sheikh. There are the otters. We always flew with 2, because if one went down, the other one could rescue you and bring you home. And if you went back the next day to get the other airplane, it was made into pots and pans and junk. This is just, yeah. This is a 450 pound bomb that the Israelis dropped on an area that had a lot of Arab soldiers, and it did not go off. It was a dud. And so I wanted to go over and take a picture, which that one was, until one of our Canadian Army chaps said, "Don't go over there, that's still alive. If that goes off, you're finished." Now this is the very tip of Sharm el-Sheikh. This is a mosque. Over here is a bay, and over here is a bay. This was one of my early trips down there, and I was so hot, and that water looked so inviting that I went down to the beach, I got my bathing suit on, and I went swimming in here. I wasn't in the water 5 minutes until one of the Army chaps said, "I think you better get out of there. There's two bays here. One is Shark Bay and one is Swim Bay, and you were in the Shark Bay." Nobody warned me. These are the guns, the cannons, I guess you call them, down in the Straits of Hormuz over here. In order to get up into the through the Straits of Hormuz, up into the Gulf of Aqaba, Israeli had only one seaport, and it was at the very top of that water. And when the Egyptians decided to block the Straits of Hormuz, it was the only way in up to the only seaport in Israel. And Israel said, "Enough of this business, we're going to fix this." And so they came down, I don't know how many, they blew up these because these were aimed at the only channel in through there, and it was the closest to the guns. And yeah, they made sure that they wouldn't be firing anymore. This is your guide here taking a little rest. This was an unnamed ship in the channel that goes up to Israel on the left. We're getting pretty close now to the southern end of the Sinai. It gets very mountainous, and this was me taken by my friend in the other otter, but that's my story and I'm sticking to it. You can see how rough it was. We're flying these single-engine airplanes over pretty rough territory, so Mount St. Catherine's, the monastery, was down here. I'll show you it in a moment. And they used to run tours by vehicle from Cairo, and they would stop down here, and you could walk up to St. Catherine's Monastery, which was at 7,400 feet. And that's pretty rough there, but we had the airplane and we could fly around it, get the best angle from it. This is St. Catherine's Monastery. That's it. It's 1,200 years old. There are books and all sorts of wonderful treasures in there. It's manned all year round. And if you want to see it like that, there's two peaks, and the monastery is in the crack between the two peaks. Oh yeah, I had to take a picture of my friend too. I think you notice that any of the creek small rivers you see, they're all dry. There's St. Catherine's Monastery looking straight down in between the two peaks, and it's walled. Trees growing only there. You can read about it in whatever history books. Was one of the main things we did on our tours for guests. Again, you can see the trees. They had a well in there for water, so in case you're wondering. This was in the Sinai desert, and it's a P-50 Mustang from one of the wars 20 or 25 years before I got there, and it's, I don't know, it could still be there. Forced landing in the sand, and it tipped over. No story about the pilot at all, but I don't like to see broken airplanes like that. You see the jambias. These are all handmade by Yemen. You can have a look at them, take them out. The more rich, the higher the rank, the more expensive the metal, the more expensive the jeeps, the diamonds, rubies, all that kind of stuff in them. But these were just kind of ordinary people. So we're out of the Sinai and back down to Yemen, and I've got a fair amount of time flying through clouds, something like 1,000 hours, but I've never seen anything like this in my life. These are the thunderstorms starting up from the desert down in Jizan, just off the Red Sea. And what we had to do as pilots was take the aircraft and put them over by where the two jeeps were and tie them down, because the winds coming out of these thunderstorms, I phoned up the local weather office, and they had the radar, and I said, what's the top of these clouds? Because I wanted to go on my trip, and they said, oh, there are 65,000 the tops, thunderstorms. So no, we left the airplanes tied up to the jeeps and said, we'll go tomorrow. This is from Sinai, Yemen is the capital, and it is in a extinct volcano with a ridge of mountain tops around it. And in order to get out of Sinai to our 3 outposts, we had to take off out of Sinai, that's 7,400 feet. We had to climb to 13,000 feet, and then over the top, and then down to whichever outpost we were going to. It's pretty rough territory. On the, just off the Rub al Khali Desert, these were the, oh shoot, no, the, over there now, the Russians are, yeah, Ukrainian. This was one of their tents out there. You can see how rough the ground is. This is the edge of one of the mountains, and so we had to go up over the top and down. You were 40 miles to the Red Sea. Here's one of the airplanes in one of the better airports, runways. Dirt track, no pavement, lots of rocks. These were locals farming. He had a plow made out of a tree, but there's the odd tree around. You can see the edge of the runway, they're all rocks. This was in Najran, which was at an altitude of 4,400 feet, and right on the edge of the Rub'a Kali Desert. And they came back from a trip with an engine not sounding too good, so they started taking things apart. It's one of the technicians here. We had no covered places to work on, and he's wearing a mask because no matter where you go out there, the moment you sit down, you have a cloud of black, what look like normal houseflies, and they're just coming and landing on you. It's like your sweat or the salt off you, or so he had to wear that while he was working. And it wasn't, this was the Yugoslav, we had a couple of Yugoslav army, some helping us guards and so on. This is the Caribou, of course. On the landing, wasn't his fault, but a rock hit the hydraulic brake line and spilled it all out. And so they're working as quickly as they can in 110-degree temperature, and they did get it fixed in an hour, and off they went. This is squadron leader Ian Umbach. He was our original commanding officer. This is Dave, and I convinced him to come over after I went over to Egypt. He put in for it, and he came over just in the last part of my. I have not got the name of this Canadian pilot, but I mean the dressing was whatever you had in your suitcase. The whole situation was run by Sana, the headquarters, where you had a room and you had all sorts of nice things. The Yemen, we had nothing to talk about. You could dress the way you wanted unless you were going flying, and the sun was blue murder. We had a Norwegian as a radio officer, and we were in touch with the world, HF radio. And we had a mechanic there, and he's got one of these, you know what these foggers are? You put some special stuff in, and you crank it up, and you light the fire, and shake it up, and when you pull the trigger, it emits a white smoke, which kills all the flies for about 5 minutes. And then they say, ha, we're coming back. So him and the Norwegian were always fighting over things. Not fist fighting, but just they were at each other all the time. And so it's called a fogger. The Norwegian said, I'm going to do one up on him, and he went over, started the fogger up. This is the stuff to kill mosquitoes. This was the last one. So what the Canadian NCO did, we were allowed 1 5-gallon jerry can full of water a day for showers, for whatever you wanted to use. They filled them up every night, put them over on the side. By the time we finished our work day at 4:30, 5 o'clock, maybe a little later, we then would have a shower. What happened was the NCO was there. Got from the kitchen, we had American 5-in-1 rations. There were all kinds of nice things in it, including strawberry drink. And the strawberry drink mixed very nicely because now the jerry cases of water had warmed up because it was sitting out in the sun. And so he emptied about 4 or 5 cartons of strawberry jello with the water and put it over where the shower is because he knew that his friend there was going to take a shower, and you were only allowed that one 5-gallon can no matter what you did with it. And so he got all undressed and he got underneath the shower and turned it on, and this sweet strawberry juice came dribbling down, and then this mass of flies came over, and he just ran back into the tent. So he said, I'm going to get ready. I'm going to get even with this guy. And so he got that fogger and he got it going. And don't ask me why, but Scandinavians like to sleep in the nude. But the Norwegian guy went into the tent, was lying down, was fast asleep. And the fogger went on and everybody started yelling, fire, fire. And of course, he woke up. It was dark, but it was full of this smoky stuff, and he just ran at a world speed for running, run right through the side of the tape in nude, and started running across the desert. So these kind of things happen in these unique, out in the wilderness, you know. Most of Yemen was volcanic, still is, and that's very rich earth for growing things. And the Yemeni grew all their fruits, all their vegetables. They had goats, they had camels, they had everything. They were pretty good farmers. And you can see how dry it is. And what are they? At Jizan, on the edge of the Rub al Khali desert, we had trailers, we had extra vehicles, we have gasoline cans. It was just all there in the open. You can see the volcanic ridge over there. So no matter which direction you came back home to Sinai, you had to go up to 13,000 feet over the top and then come and land at Sinai. And this was one of the outposts, Gizan, right on the shore, the Red Sea. And when he heard an airplane coming in, he knew it was going back to Sinai. He had had it after 1 week in this place. And so he picked up his clothes and his stuff, and he was sneaking out the back door. Before you know it, he was hiding in the back of the otter, wanting to go back home to Sinai. That is where I got the local schistosomiasin, which is a virus. And I was down for a week, and they radioed up Sinai. Sinai sent an airplane with a UN doctor, and he came down, said, yeah, I know what you got, here's what you did. He gave me a bunch of pills, or white pills about that big. I had to break it in pieces, I couldn't swallow the thing. And in 3 days I was back in the airplane flying. That was the only time that I was sick over there. This is Gizan, this is the shoreline here, the water's over here. This was our living in the desert at Gizan. You see our beds were camp cots. You see the can that's wide open. The things that you had to watch out for were, what do you call those nasty little things that look like lobsters? scorpions. There were two, a light brown and a dark brown. The light brown bit you, it just hurt a bit. If the dark brown bit you, you had to get the medicine and drink it down right away. Otherwise, you'd be dead the next morning. It's really, really bad stuff. And the scorpions used to crawl in out of the sun and hide around the bottom of the tents. So if you were reaching in for something and you felt a bite, you better take care of it pretty quick. So it might have been 110 during the day, but the evening the temperature would go down to 50 or 55 Fahrenheit. It was cool. And we had sleeping bags, and we would sleep on these cots, not inside, but outside. And you had to make sure that your whole sleeping bag was tucked in around you, because if not, let's say a little bit fell over the side and was near the ground, the scorpions could crawl up it and get you. These wooden legs, of course, they were shell type, whatever you call them, and they couldn't crawl up the legs to get you because they just slide back down again. But yeah, and I would like you to know, as I tell everybody about this, is that I was single here, and I was paying $95 a month room and board to the Royal Canadian Air Force. And I was in this, in 3 different locations of outposts, and spend a week in Sinai and then out to this one, and then back in Sinai and then out to a different one. And when I got back home, I asked the financial officer, I said, I was single, I was in the Middle East, and I was paying $95 room and board. That was my berth. That was my room. And eating American 5-in-1 rations in cardboard boxes that were at least 20 years old, but they weren't poisonous. And we enjoyed the camembert cheese in particular because it was still fresh if you took the wrapping. Everybody see a camel there? There's his head. So the runway was over there. It was nothing but tracks in the sand. There were camels running loose from locals, and he was curious about something or another, I don't know. This is back in Sinai, the capital. The first capital was Taiz in the middle of Yemen. The second, this is the latest capital city in Yemen. And where are we? Was walled city all the way around. Out here was the cemetery. And when you were driving in from the airport and going by here, the smell was just incredibly horrible. And my first trip into Sinai, I had the fellow driving the Jeep tell me that don't react when we go through the gate, because on top of the gate was a shelf, and there were 3 heads with bullet holes in the forehead. And I nearly fell out of the Jeep going underneath there. But our building here, the UN building, was somewhere over here. And they closed the gates at dark, and they opened them up again in the daytime. This was at Gizan, on the shore of the Red Sea. 2 otters again. One of the airplanes was a transient. You can see that it was a mud, but we quite liked it because we loaded up the otters quite heavily, and the temperature was 110, 120. And if you didn't get off the ground on the first takeoff, you turned around and came back and took 500 pounds off and throw it out, and then you tried again. There was no problem because you had 5 miles of flat mud runway. Yes, you had lots of runway. This is Charlie I'd like you to meet. Charlie and I had a little thing going on that wasn't fun. Some of these things that he was chewing on were right beside the runway. And so he wasn't there in the morning. I don't know where he was, but we would have breakfast and take off about 8:30 in the morning, go out and do a 4-hour trip and come back, and guess who is standing in the middle of the runway? And this is like a 1,500-pound animal, very stubborn. And so the standard thing was to come to look out. Oh yeah, there's Charlie over there. As you do a low pass over him, you wouldn't move him a foot. Say, he's stubborn today. So you go around a little lower, a little more power on the engine, a little more noise, back over top him again. And this time we got him to move off to the side, but you didn't want to land in case he ran into you. And so time 3, I had it. With 110 degrees in the cockpit, 450 horsepower heater in front of me, 4 hours of turbulence and eyeballs falling out of your head. So I came around, I went right down, I came at him from the back, and I put his head in between the Otter's wheels, which meant that in level flight, the propeller was pretty close to just above his head. And I went over him with full power on, just over his head, and I still say to this day that he's still running across 1,500 miles across the Sinai desert to, what's the country over there? Anyway, I don't think he ever came back, but I think I won that one. This is the caribou, in case you didn't know what it looked like. These guys are transient. They were delivering something or another. Absolutely marvelous airplane. And it was a STOL airplane, short takeoff and landing. So you could either land or take off in 600 feet, which is amazing for a 30,000-pound loaded airplane. Another short story, if I have the time. I came back to Trenton from the Middle East, and the commanding officer called me in after 2 weeks there and said, George, he said, I got a favor to ask you. I said, oh, no, I don't want to go back to the Middle East, no. He said, we got a pilot, and we got a brand new caribou, and they need it over in El Arish. And we want you to take him and the airplane and take it over to El Arish and come right back to your old job here in Trenton. I said, this sounds kind of fishy. But anyway, what happened was they put extra gas tanks in it. I had 22 hours of fuel. We flew from Trenton down to Goose Bay to the island, Greenland. Yeah, over to Europe, over to Egypt, not Egypt, anyway, and 38 flying hours, 5 days, we delivered the airplane and the pilot. And I sat around for a week waiting for the North Star to come in and take me back to Trenton. Marvelous airplane. I would fly a de Havilland airplane, no matter what it was, anytime, anywhere, any place. This is the airport at El Arish, Egypt. There's a runway, there's a runway. It was 12 kilometers out from where we lived, right on the shore of the Mediterranean, which incidentally was just 10 miles from the end of the Suez Canal. This was where I risked my whole career. I was in Saudi Arabia, and a couple of International Red Cross people came up to me, and that's a Red Cross flag. This is a, what do you call it, a mobile mini hospital where they were providing medical service to those people around there who had been wounded or shot at or whatever. And they came up to me and said, do you think that you could take this X-ray machine to this particular place and drop it off on your way home? I said, I'm not authorized to do that. And he said, well, we just wish you could do it because we could save so many lives. And I thought to myself, well, I'm going home soon. It's not too far out of my way. And I had no idea of the run. There was no runway. It was just straight sand. And said, finally, I said, you know, if I did this and something happened on the way home, I'd be court-martialed or dead or one thing or the other. I said, all right, I said, you get your guys, I'll open the back of the Caribou, we'll put this 800-pound X-ray thing right up underneath the wing, and I will take it. They said, oh, whew, okay. So I got it loaded, I took off out of there, flew a couple of hours to get to there from where we were, and I landed, and they took it off, and they thanked us profusely, and in effect, my flight home, instead of going like that, my flight home was going into there, and then there'd be no way anybody would know that I'd flown an extra 20 minutes or whatever. But if they did, I'd have been court-martialed as a general low-ranked flying officer. Nobody except a couple of meetings like this knew that I did that without authorization.
I think you're safe now.
Yes, So we're back in Elarish here. We had a shack down on the beach, which was just, I don't know, 100 feet from the fence of the gate that we were in. And it looks lovely, doesn't it? Yeah. But the Suez Canal, down here somewhere, as the ships came through the canal and they got into the water, they would flush their fuel tanks, which is bunker C, which is a very black, sticky, honey-like fuel that the boats used. And then it would float around and end up on the sand. And so nobody was ever down on the beach there, because if you stepped in this stuff, it was just terrible. And in the beach here, there were 2 5-gallon cans of kerosene that you could wash your feet off with, because you didn't want to walk around being stuck on the ground. This was a little girl very close to our base in one of the tents, and she kept hanging around like the other 2 little guys, and you can see the Canadian and the NCOs, non-commissioned officers, got a coat and a hat and rubber flip-flops, and got the tailor to fix it up a bit. And we gave it to her one time. She was sitting around by the fence. I thought it was a pretty nice present. And at last, the end. I thank you very much for your attention. I hope I didn't have missed too many words. There's some souvenirs from Yemen here, and this funny looking jambia that the mature Yemeni all wear these. And I can't tell you what they use this for, but it's pretty wicked. That's handmade Yemeni. They used to get 45-gallon fuel drums and use the metal to make these things. But if you were a prince or something like that, you'd all have diamonds and rubies and gold and all that kind of stuff. This is more like from a peasant one. The hands were all rhinoceros horns. It has something to do with good luck or religion or something. Anybody wants to look at a book on Yemen, there's only 45 pages of print. The rest of it is pictures. And where are we? That's it. Thank you very much, chaps. Questions?
Well, George, thank you for a very nostalgic talk. I say nostalgic because I spent a year over there in El Arish and Rafah as well, as a medical officer. And spent a lot of time in that hospital that you described. And also in Rafah. And my wife Marilyn here was in Lebanon during that time, working for the United Nations. So we really enjoyed the talk.
Thank you. We loved Beirut, especially the airport had a little restaurant in there, and we didn't have time for lunch or anything, so we left El Arish in the morning, 3-hour flight up there, unloaded. It was lunchtime, so we bought these, they're like hot dog shape, but they're full of chicken and fresh buns. Shawarma, yes, that's it. So we get 2 of them to go and a Coke, get in the airplane, and as soon as we leveled off and give it to the co-pilot to fly while you ate yours and whatever. There are other stories. The one that I like the best, if I have another minute, was I was flying the Caribou from El Arish to Gaza and then up to Beirut. The Israelis insisted that UN fly 30 miles off the coast of Israel. And nobody understood that, but you're flying an Otter single engine with 7 passengers wearing life jackets and wheels hanging down. If the engine ever quit, you're just going in. If you got any closer to Israel, you would get a surprise. And this particular time I had a brand new co-pilot, and we're out to the Mediterranean, and he kept looking out the side window, and he's like, I said, "What's the matter with you? You got bugs in your whatever?" He said, "What's that?" I said, "What?" So I looked out. Here's an Israeli fighter, a Myster, out on my wing. And the Caribou is not a fast airplane. It's 165, around that. And he's in his cockpit going like this, that I should take all the Arabs in the airplane I have and land in Israel. No, no, no. So I said, "You watch him and see what he does." And so the throttles in the Caribou are up in the ceiling. And so I just sort of went like this. And as I started to pull back down, I got to the speed that the Myster just doesn't fly at. The wings are stalled. And all of a sudden there was boom. And I looked out and I said, "What happened to the co-pilot?" He said, "He lit the afterburner and he went straight up. He's just getting into the stall." And I said, "Oh," "that's interesting. He's probably going back to Israel to change his shorts." Yeah.
George, what years were you out there?
63, 64. And about a year after that, where are they?
You mentioned the Yemen mission shut down.
Who came down, invaded El Arish? Not the Lebanese.
The Syrians or?
Sorry?
You mean the 67 war? 16 war?
I'm missing a group, but they gave them 2 weeks warning, and they came down. Israelis came down, and they just smashed. El Arish was just a pile of junk, nothing left. But they had 2 weeks warning, and so the UN got everybody to ferry the aircraft out, and it was just I don't know. After a while, I didn't know anything about the Israel or Egypt or anything, and after a year over there, I came back. I still didn't know anything. It was more complicated and more. Anyway, I just was happy to get back. Yeah. So, but I was 23, and I said, you can't hurt me. There's no way, you know. I got shot at twice. The side of the Little Otter on the Roundel, a guy on the ground with a shotgun. And the other one, I was in the Caribou doing a patrol, and I heard this blink, somewhat like the radio antenna that I knocked off the Jeep. So I was looking at all the instruments and everything. Everything's fine. I sent the engineer back to check it out. He came back and he said, we've been shot at, we've been hit. I said, what? He said, the bullet went through the floor, went up through the ceiling in the airplane, and knocked out the flashing anti-collision light, the red light. And I did the math, and I'm no good at school stuff, but I was one of the best pilots the Air Force ever had. And I did the math, and I calculated that if I had been doing 10 knots faster, he would have shot sooner, and the bullet would have went up through my seat and right up my butt. So I've had a couple of things like that to say, oh my God, what am I doing here, you know? And all they're going to give me is this little yellow ribbon. You know? Anyway, thank you very much for your attention. It's been my pleasure, and anyway, lots of fun. If you want to look at the map, you can find some of the places, and I'll leave these out for a while. And if you're a quick reader, you can. The Yemeni people, this is my opinion, having spent a year there, the Yemeni people are nice people. They're farmers, and we got along very well with them. And in the souk, in the market, you could buy any fruit, any vegetables. You know, it was just great. And what happened was that Sana'a was in the middle of Yemen. The Russians wanted it, plus the airport. And consequently, the Russians didn't just want to run right in there. So they got the Egyptians to go in and raid the whole town. And by the way, they emptied the Yemeni finance banks and all that. They took all the money out of there and took it away. And that's when the shooting started, and all the local Yemenis that I stick up for went out into the mountains. And it's terrible. Right now, it was just not within the past month. There's a million Yemeni, not 1,000, a million, are suffering in starvation and whatever, because there's only one road from the shore up over the mountains and back in, and they wouldn't, whoever was up there wouldn't let them go through. I don't understand some of this. I just, anyway, thanks very much. Thank you. Thank you.